Disney Plus has a documentary series that takes a look behind the scenes at the making of Frozen 2. Today I'm going to be looking at the third episode as Frozen 2 is reaching its fifth screening before the movie comes out. Stick with me, and I'm going to break it all down after the intro. Well, hello there! My name's Jeremy and welcome back to Freeform Disney, where I talk about all aspects of Disney, from the animated movies to the theme parks to Star Wars, Marvel, and Pixar, and the TV shows, and everything else in between. And that is why it's Freeform. And keep coming back every day for new daily content. If you're not subscribed yet, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Today it's on to episode 3 of Disney's Into the Unknown, making Frozen 2. And hey, I hope you're enjoying taking this journey with me. We're up to our first episode that is no longer more than 40 minutes. They're getting shorter and shorter. This time the episode is called Journey to Ahtohallan, a name that tells us we're definitely going to be talking a lot about Show Yourself. So here's what went down. We're back at 8 months to premiere, so it's March, and we're a little ahead of the screening the day of, and we see poor Peter Devil Vecho, and oh man, he gets so nervous before the screenings, and I guess he came in 3 hours before the screening was actually happening, or before they had to leave for it, and you just feel for him a little as he's just pacing around and wringing his hands. Oof. And then Chris Buck is talking about how he hopes we don't have to go ahead and blow up the whole thing after this. Yeah, you just hope that the reactions aren't so bad that you just need to rework big, giant pieces of it. And here's something really cool in this episode. We get to see, well, at least a little pieces of a new song, See the Sky. And this one's not on the soundtrack, so we don't get it as one of the extras there. And that means I'm incredibly intrigued by it. And apparently this was originally how Matthias and the Northuldra were going to be introduced to Anna and Elsa when they got up there. And obviously they reworked it completely because that is not what happens in Frozen 2. There is no See the Sky song. So that's intriguing. Jennifer Lee talked about how she told people to go ahead and text her to breathe during the screening, and how, well, while there weren't any expectations really on Frozen, well, the sequel, you better bet the expectations are high, and that puts so much more stress on everyone. And so then went the screening, and then off to the Story Trust, the big old notes session, and apparently See the Sky didn't do so well. Apparently it made things cluttered, it was a little confusing to follow along with, and dang. But Show Yourself was seen as being important, so hey, it made it through. All the times that it got so close to potentially getting cut or majorly changed away from what we know, rather than working its way closer and closer. Whew. It's like, just tells you what happens in that process, right? Pretty crazy sometimes. Pretty crazy. So what about See the Sky being removed? We went a little more into this. We got to see the process of it getting struck from the movie as we looked at Heather Blodgett, the production supervisor for the editorial department, and Johnny Hilton, who is the shot coordinator over there, and just see him delete it out. And then, well, that sends the notices across to all the different departments, so no more work on that. And then we got to also meet Sterling K. Brown finally within the series, and that's the actor who plays Matthias. And breaking the news to him, it's like, that is not news you're going to be happy to go ahead and break. Looks like Chris Buck got to be the one to break it, and then Jennifer Lee came in a little bit later, and, well, actually she also had a comment how, if it were a Broadway musical, it'd probably still be in there, because you'd have 22 different songs at least. As opposed to here, where we have way fewer songs. So hey, when Frozen 2, the musical, goes to Broadway, you might actually go ahead and get it in there. Assuming it happens, because Frozen, the musical, didn't do as well as they expected it to do on Broadway. So I'm not sure if Frozen 2 will go to Broadway or not when you think about it that way. There's an interesting question. Frozen 2 certainly did well as a movie, that's for sure. One interesting thing I thought was, when it came to Sterling Brown, he actually sang as part of his audition, so he certainly expected it, and in the end, had no song to sing. But back to just having to trust your directors and creators as to what the heck they're doing, and they're making the best movie they can. So hey, maybe we'll get to see him sing in Frozen 3, right? Let's see, what else did we get to see? Oh, from him, we also got to see him doing some of the efforting, which I think is the first time we've seen that in the documentary. And efforting is where you're making all those normal kind of noises. Now, in live action, you just naturally make those noises as you're doing whatever exertion. But in animation, you don't do the running or lifting or climbing or whatever the heck else. So you have to make the noises you would make during that so they can put them into animation. So we got to see all of that getting done. And one last thing before we completely leave him and See the Sky behind. I would love to see the Sky get released at some point, just so we can hear the full song as to what it would have been. Can we get that as an extra sometime? Yes, please? Because we only got to see the tiniest portion of it here in this episode, and I'd love to see the full thing. Or hear it, I guess, would be more accurate than seen, huh? Oh, I suppose so. Okay, so we're on to 7 months to premiere. It's April now. And we're busy talking about Show Yourself because we finally cracked probably the biggest issue with Show Yourself. Because up until April, they still did not know who the heck the voice was that was singing to Elsa this whole time. But what happened is that Bobby and Kristen Lopez went back and they got this idea to put in a reprise to the lullaby from the very beginning of the movie in there. And it just worked so well that everyone was almost instantly on the same page that, hey, the voice is definitely the mother calling to Elsa. No question, that's where it was. And it also brings the whole movie full circle, it connects things up really nicely, and it just, sometimes when things click, they click really well. But it can be a real pain getting to that spot. And that certainly seems to be the case here with Show Yourself and all the work it took to get to that spot. So we got to go further, we got to see Evan Rachel Wood come on in and go do the recording for Queen IDUNA and her part over in Show Yourself. And hey, it was really nice getting to hear her talk about how having Jennifer Lee as a director really makes a difference. Because having a female director, she understands what really goes on internally with young women and with mothers. And so you get certain directorial choices that you wouldn't get from a man necessarily. And back to some of the problem we get when there are so disproportionately many men behind everything within filmmaking nowadays. And even worse if you go back in time, I suppose. But point being, so there are stories to be told that don't get told as well, or things that just don't get brought out as well if we don't have that representation in there. And hey, it's just a nice point of really bringing that in and giving a personal example of how that works. And, for instance, in this case right here. Now, on a kind of random side note, I've watched way too much Westworld recently, and now I kind of want to see a musical episode of Westworld. Just saying. Well, after that, we're still talking Show Yourself. Now we're talking the visuals of Show Yourself. So we get to go look at building the glacier, building Ahtohallan. So Jennifer Lee was talking about how it has to be this entire natural world that will respond to her magically. And that means we bring in Michael GIAIMO, the production designer for both Frozen and now Frozen 2. And some of the real problems there apparently are because of all the reflections you get in ice and all the different issues there and the giant sizes, etc., etc. Some of the same problems you get with water, you get also with ice, for similar reasons. Yeah, I can see that. They talked about how 3 years earlier, back in September of 2016, they had gone over to Norway, Finland, and Iceland to go research areas up there and really get an idea for what the ice and just the nature of those northern areas was like and how important that was. Like, for instance, the shoreline over in Iceland, just one spot in it, was the direct inspiration for the whole dark sea shoreline and the sea right there. And you see it, yeah, really cool. So now we're up to 6 months until premiere. We're off into May and we're continuing to build that glacier. So we've got David Womersley, who's the art director for environments, and we get to see the glacier being built in the computer and see getting manipulated. And I mean, it's just cool to watch that. Very cool. Then we move over to Brittany Lee, and she's a visual development artist, and she's really working on that whole interior, and this is really the first time we've gotten to see the interior of it, or they've really been working on it. And part of the need was really getting Show Yourself to a point that they knew what the heck to do with it, because you needed that song to understand why you needed the space in certain ways or what it needed to be for Elsa to work in the movie. And so it's hard to work on it before the song got far enough along that they were ready. And we hear how this has really been the last real design challenge over from the production side for the film, and that it's been problematic since day one. It's not just the song being problematic. No. Even the entire ice design of Ahtohallan inside and out has been problematic. Yeah. So you thought it was just the song. No. It's everything. It's all been difficult. And then we got to go ahead and take that the next step further, and we got to go ahead and see Brittany Lee pitching her concepts for that interior design over to Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck. And just how nervous she was because she wasn't sure how it would land. And it was really cool getting to see the little screen with what the room is reserved for as you're heading on in. I haven't commented on it before at this point, but we see it a number of times just before we go in the room. It's kind of cool. In this case, apparently the room is named Motunui, which I love that they name their rooms depending on different movies that they've worked on. Gotta make me wonder what some of the other ones are named. Now, what they went ahead and called this session, they call it the Ahtohallan Mind Meld. Nice. And then apparently later, there's animation dailies for an hour, a half hour for specifically dealing with some piece with the wind spirit. Sequence 190 for whatever that's worth nowadays. I just love that little extra detail and just sneaking a peek at some of the rest of how that process works, even if it's super background like that. Well, anyway, Jennifer Lee and Chris Buck loved the idea that she came in there with. The whole idea of Elsa being led by the lights and how that would work and eventually bring it to where she transformed. And oof, yeah. And I mean, we've seen the movie, that is the general way it works. Certainly refined quite a bit from here, but yeah, that is it. Very nice. Getting closer. And now it's time to really hit into a more emotional part of this episode, because it's going to definitely get a lot tougher here. Because now it's time to talk about the next right thing. Each episode we seem to definitely put a focus on another one of the songs we haven't been talking about, and this time, that's where we're at. And so really we're going to be talking about how you wrestle with the anxiety of having things to lose. Because Anna in the first movie didn't quote-unquote have something to lose according to Jennifer Lee, but yeah, certainly she does. We got to go ahead and meet the animation supervisor for Anna, which is HYUN Min Lee. She talked about how there were new brow shapes, really, that they didn't use at all or much in the first film just because of how much sadder Anna is in this film. And it's intriguing how, yeah, you have even those kind of pieces you might not think about here when you're just watching it. And really, we also got to hear how much it meant to her to have Anna really going here, because she, HYUN Min Lee, has really had a big struggle with depression in her life. And the intriguing part there is that Kristen Bell, who does the voice for Anna, actually really helped be a big inspiration for her during some of her darkest times. And kind of that full circle nature right there, it's just got to be extra special. And touching stories like this are super nice to hear. So then we got to see Kristen Bell come in for her recording session for the song. And we got to hear the idea of where Do the Next Right Thing came from. And apparently it came from early discussions, especially between Jennifer Lee and Kristen Bell. Sounds like the specific phrasing of it might actually be specifically Kristen Bell's phrasing, because they were really talking about Kristen Bell's anxiety and depression. And she talked about how when she's experiencing her anxiety or depression, what she really does and tries to focus on is that when she wakes up and she's feeling really low, then you got to step out of bed, and then the next right thing is to brush her teeth, and the next right thing is to have a cup of coffee, and the next right thing is to wake my kids up, and the next right thing, etc., etc. And that's kind of her mantra that gets her through things when she's at her lowest points. And you can see that this directly inspired the movie as well. And that connection is really neat at the same time. And I have to say, watching this section too can be a little tough, because you see the emotional toll it takes on Kristen Bell to actually put herself in the place to be able to sing this song. I mean, just look at the mascara running and just her face as to how much it breaks her down. Back to how you have to really put yourself in that spot to be able to touch those emotions and sing about it and sing from that place. And whew, yeah. Well, anyway, moving on. Jennifer Lee, she went ahead and talked about how Anna, as a character for her, really is the one that deals with a lot of the things she coped with while Jennifer Lee was growing up, but that she never really got to see on the screen herself, but she always wished she could have seen. And I have to say, we have so many Disney characters that go through such gigantic trauma, but often that trauma seems to be used mainly just to make them the hero, without really dealing with how they cope with it. Instead, they seem to be more superhuman, which, gotta be frank, can be a little dangerous sometimes and giving you the feeling of not measuring up to the very heroes on the screen. And really, when it comes to it, in some ways it's a little bizarre that we've seen so little of dealing with anxiety and depression in Disney movies, especially when you think about all those tragic backstories that pretty much every one of our Disney heroes have. And hey, I'm super glad that this movie does at least focus a little on it. At least we're seeing it a bit. And yes, you can still have a happy, triumphant movie and actually deal with how we deal with anxiety and depression within the movie. Those are not mutually exclusive. Now for me, as far as my favorite song in this movie, it sways back and forth between this one right here, Do the Next Right Thing, and Show Yourself for being my favorite song. Now, I listen to Show Yourself much more than Do the Next Right Thing, just because it can be tough sometimes to listen to Do the Next Right Thing, just the emotion within it. But nevertheless, it's such a good song, and I am so glad it made it into the movie. Well, we move on to the last section, which is still directly connected here. So the last 7 minutes of the episode are devoted to talking about Ryder Buck. Now, Ryder Buck is Chris Buck's son, and, well, he died during the last bits of the production of the first movie. And we got to hear how Jennifer Lee really created the character of Ryder, who we met within the movie Frozen 2, and it really was a love letter to Chris Buck and his son that way. And, of course, she got Chris Buck's permission before doing it. And getting to see even Jennifer Lee's reaction to even talking about Ryder and how much it impacts just starts to get to you right there. And then, of course, we get to hear from Chris Buck about his son, too. And he talked about how it was really messy at the end of that first production because the timing of when it happened, well, in other words, the wrap party of the movie was up there and people are both congratulating him and also saying they were so sorry for hearing about his son's death. So it's just a constant roller coaster you can't escape from at that moment. So for him, that also means that whole song of Do the Next Right Thing is just also huge for Chris Buck as well. It really touches him, especially for what he had to go through after his son died. We got to go ahead and meet his wife, Shelley Buck, and see Ryder's favorite spot up there and see them talking about that. And heck, apparently it was the first time she found out that Ryder was in the movie as a character. And they really tried to make it a reference to who the actual Ryder Buck was. You'd be a very light spirit, very positive character, very fun, hopeful. I mean, that's just a touching tribute right there. Yeah, it really is. And it's really neat seeing just how close Chris Buck and Jennifer Lee are, too, and just how much they're interconnected in their families that way, and just how much other people have an effect on your life. So yeah, and we end the episode with Chris Buck singing Leave Your Light On, which was a song by his son to end the episode. So yeah, the back half of this episode, it's heavy. It can emotionally get to you right there, that's for sure. I mean, this was, without a doubt, the most emotional episode of the documentary so far, and I didn't expect it to pop up like that. And it's a little tough to see all that loss and hurt. But then the message is about continuing on and doing the next right thing, right? Yeah, it is indeed. It is indeed. Well, moving right along. Let me show a few people that we only briefly saw in the episode, but I didn't get to expound upon. I mean, there were just so many people involved in a movie like this in so little time. Again, I'm happy they put more people into this, even if they're only in here for a short little bit. Now, as another note, I can't help but look at the backgrounds of the offices and the little things people put in them. Whether it be an Elsa doll here or the little snow geese or a Pikachu plush, I just love all the personalization and that little extra humanization and connection that it happens to coincidentally give to us as the viewers. I mean, that's really nice as well. Not that that's why it's there, but I like that. Here's an interesting different note. Talking about Show Yourself. It gets kind of screwy sometimes to keep seeing it in these early stages And sometimes seeing a part that you know is off, but you just can't quite put your finger on why it's off. Unless you go back and watch the other one or listen to it. What's even more screwy, though, is sometimes your memory gets tricked a little bit by these earlier versions when we're seeing them here in the documentary, and you can mix up which pieces were really there and which ones weren't in the actual movie. It's super screwy. Memory is fun that way, and it's intriguing to see how it can actually get warped. Well, we still have a lot to do with Show Yourself, and I'm sure we're going to keep talking a lot about that as we move onward. I mean, heck, the 5th screening didn't turn out too bad for it. Although, See the Sky certainly fell on its sword in its place right there. And I would love to see that one get released. Please get released. Well, anyway, what about you? Would you love to see the song See the Sky released? And does the song Do the Next Right Thing, or this part of the episode, did it really touch you? Let me know down below in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a like, share it with someone you think will too, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you back here tomorrow for another new episode of Freeform Disney. Have a magical day, and may the Force be with you. Always.